Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Ton of talent has entered the transfer portal the last couple of days, and want to take a deep dive into this Georgia program and talk about some players that are getting a lot of buzz from the Georgia Bulldogs, and then offer you guys some players that I think would be really good fits in Athens through the transfer portal. And whenever you're talking Georgia as it pertains to the transfer portal, they're one of those programs that doesn't really need to go to the transfer portal all that much because they recruit at the highest level of college football, and they also develop talent at the highest level in college football. And quite frankly, there's just not that many players available in the transfer portal that Georgia and that they could come into this Georgia roster and be difference makers. That's just how talented this Georgia roster is. It is arguably the most talented roster in all of college football. With that being said, there are a few names that I think would certainly elevate this team heading into 2024. I think Kirby Smart will certainly look to get this roster better heading into 2024. We're going to talk about some of those names. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a special shout out to the Georgia fans. This was one of these teams that we just love talking about the whole 2023 season. The amount of support the Georgia fans showed the boys was absolutely amazing. All the Go Dogs in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with, one of the more high-profile names that's in the transfer portal right now, and that's former Florida running back Trevor Etienne. 2 seasons at Florida, ran for over 1,400 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, and I don't even think those numbers do justice to quite how good of a running back Trevor Etienne was, especially in that 2023 season. Florida Gator fans will tell you this. That was one of the worst offensive lines in all of the SEC. And Trevor Etienne was still able to average almost 6 yards per carry in 2023. Ran for 753 yards in that 2023 season. You dig a little deeper into those numbers, 530 of those yards came after contact. That is an outstanding number for a running back. Trevor Etienne's ability to have that contact balance, to be able to make people miss at the second level, that acceleration. Very few running backs across the country have that kind of capability. Trevor Etienne, behind that Georgia offensive line, I think could do scary things for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024. And again, only going into his third year of college football. This is a guy that still has a lot of meat left on the bones in terms of developing as a running back. And another thing you absolutely love about Trevor Etienne, 21 targets for the Florida Gators in 2023, caught all 21 of them. This is an elite pass catcher out of the backfield. One of those conversations that I don't think happens enough for running backs. Having a running back that can be kind of a matchup nightmare for opposing linebackers out of the backfield as a pass catcher, it kind of elevates what you can do as an offense. And Trevor Etienne, one of the best pass catching running backs that you see across the country. We remember how James Cook was for the Georgia Bulldogs a couple of years ago. Trevor Etienne, yes, a little bit of a different body type, but can offer that similar skill set in terms of what James Cook could do for Georgia out of the backfield. Trevor Etienne, one of my favorite running backs in the country, and you're asking me if this would help the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024, this one's an absolute no-brainer. Now, the second guy I want to talk about that is not getting a ton of national media attention, but those who follow the SEC closely are pretty familiar with a guy named London Humphreys. Was a true freshman for Vanderbilt last year. And there wasn't much happening at Vanderbilt in terms of good offensive play. London Humphreys was one of the bright spots for this Vanderbilt team. You see the ranking, the number 1 wide receiver available in the transfer portal, 6th player overall available in the portal, 22 catches for 439 yards. For those who don't want to do the math at home, that is 20 yards per catch. And kind of digging in deeper to the numbers, his average depth of target was 16 yards down the field. London Humphreys is a guy that kind of opens up that deeper third for a passing attack, and that's probably what Georgia's looking for. And again, if you're going to lose a guy like Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, grabbing London Humphreys, who's only going into his second year of college football, would be a massive building block for this Georgia offense. A couple other things that I love is, 6'2", 200 pounds. You have a very good frame there. A 10 100-meter dash time. This dude absolutely cooks. Georgia fans know this. He took a 50-yard touchdown to the house against the Georgia Bulldogs this year. London Humphreys, a big frame with absolute burners, but also has some polished route running to him. I am really excited to see if the Georgia Bulldogs can land London Humphreys and what he brings to this Georgia program in 2024. I think he'd be a massive addition to that pass catcher room. Now, a few other names that now I think would be great fits for Georgia. And again, this is a program that doesn't need that many guys. It's still going to be one of the more talented rosters you see in 2024. But if there was one thing that, I mean, kind of a rare occasion for Georgia under Kirby Smart was, I don't think Georgia was elite in the trenches. Like, you saw Alabama kind of take it to him on the offensive line in that SEC championship game. And you look at some of the numbers on the year, I mean, only a 6.8% sack rate for the defense. That was 51st in the country. And against the run, I mean, 3.8 yards per carry, which is pretty damn solid. That's 39th in the country. But in terms of Georgia standards, I mean, you're expecting top 10, top 5 marks in terms of sack rates, in terms of yards per carry to opposing running backs. And I just don't think, and Kirby Smart said this, and we had this conversation earlier in the year leading up to this 2023 season in terms of they didn't have a difference maker on that inside of that defensive line like you've had in the past with Jordan Davis or Devontae Wyatt or Jalen Carter. I wonder if Georgia looks at that defense and says, hey, what's one way that we can really improve heading into 2024? That secondary was arguably, and you might lose some guys, and we'll see. There's some buzz around maybe some of those dudes coming back in 2024. But you look at this Georgia team on the defensive side of the ball and said, what's the unit that can take that step and get back to that Georgia level of defense? It's certainly on that defensive line and probably on the inside. Losing guys potentially like Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Walter Nolen. He was the former 5-star prospect in that 2022 class. The Georgia Bulldogs were certainly in on him coming out of high school, made his top three in terms of his decision coming out of high school. Walter Nolen's looking for a spot where he can come in for a year, get developed, and become a top 10 pick. What is the better school in the country to go to than the Georgia Bulldogs in terms of getting developed on that inside of that defensive line? And I get it. Walter Nolen is the most coveted player in all of college football that's available in the transfer portal. Well, this is the Georgia Bulldogs. You swing a very big stick, especially when it comes to recruiting on that defensive line. If Walter Nolen is looking for a spot to get developed, I can't think of a better matchup than Georgia, especially when you look at this Georgia program and say, yeah, we need some guys up front. Like I'm high on Jordan Hall or a guy like Jamal Jarrett in terms of what they can do in year 2. But you want a guy that's a difference maker and you know is going to be a difference maker in 2024. Walter Nolen would be that difference maker. There are not many defensive linemen in the transfer portal that would elevate what Georgia has, that would even play for Georgia. Walter Nolen is probably one of those guys. And so I would be very surprised if Walter Nolen is not at least considering a visit to Athens and potentially finishing his college career for this Georgia team. The last guy I want to talk about, and again, sticking in the trenches, going to one of the best pass rushers in the SEC, and that's Princely U. And Georgia fans know how good he is. And we've seen guys go from Georgia to Florida. We just talked about Trevor Etienne potentially going to from Florida to Georgia. Princely U hits the transfer portal. I don't know how many better pass rushers in the SEC we saw than Princely U as a pure pass rusher. You look at some of the numbers. I mean, 7.5 sacks, 28 quarterback hurries, phenomenal marks, 20% pass rush win rate. I mean, that is outstanding in terms of he could go to the NFL draft and probably be a top 200 pick. We're talking about a true NFL talent who has a ton of tool bags in terms of a massive tool bag, I should say, in terms of getting after the passer. Probably one of, if not the best pure pass rusher that's available in the transfer portal. We talked about it, a 6.8% sack rate outside of the top 50. I mean, that number is going up if you do add Princely U to the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, he's another guy like Walter Nolen that's being pursued by a lot of heavy hitters. Georgia's the heaviest of the hitters in terms of recruiting on that defensive line. I'm sure Kirby Smart and this staff will get involved in Princely U and this recruitment as well. Those are the names. And again, only 4 right now. We'll see if some more emerge. This Georgia team is really talented. There are not many spots on this roster that is good. The transfer portal is going to significantly make this team better. But those are a few names that I would be keeping an eye on for the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.